What if history doesn't repeat itself, but remembers? What if the future arrives not as a surprise, but as a delayed echo, spoken once, written down, ignored, and then allowed to ripen in silence until the exact year comes due? I began this investigation with a discomforting thought. Civilizations separated by oceans and millennia should not agree on the same warning, and yet they do, again and again, always with fire. Here are the details that made me stop pretending it was coincidence. 7 sources, different continents, different cosmologies, no shared language, no shared calendar, and yet each one marks a specific kind of year, a threshold year defined by heat from above, signs in the sky, and a transformation so violent it had to be described as burning. The Greeks placed it near the end of an age. The Romans encoded it in state secrets. Persian priests tied it to cosmic cycles. Celtic scribes dyed it red. Mesoamerican astronomer priests counted toward it with terrifying patience. Biblical prophets smelled it in the air. Buddhist chroniclers whispered of it as purification. 7 voices. 1 image. Lock the door. Lower the lights. Welcome. You're inside now. I'm speaking to you from a place between archive dust and living fear. This is the channel where I document patterns others dismiss because they arrive too early or too late. Tonight's mission is precise: to reconstruct what these 7 ancient oracles meant by the year of fire, to lay their words side by side, and to test them against the one thing no prophet could fake: the sky itself. We'll move slowly at first. Names, dates, original phrases in dead languages. But the scale will widen. The temperature will rise. Because here is the final tension, and I want you to feel it before we go any further. Modern instruments, indifferent and silent, are now recording conditions that match those ancient descriptions with unsettling accuracy. Peak solar unrest, magnetic instability, atmospheric strain, all clustering around 2025-2026. So I'll ask you directly, before we open the first forbidden text, if they were all wrong, why do they sound so specific? And if they were right, why now? The trail leads first to stone. Cold, fractured stone, clinging to the slope of Mount Parnassus. I stood there years ago, before I understood what I was looking for, inside the ruins of the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Tourists murmured. Cicadas screamed in the heat. But none of them were listening for the echo that mattered, the last voice ever sanctioned to speak for the god. Most people know the Delphic oracle as riddles and fumes, a priestess muttering ambiguities. That's convenient. What is less known, quietly footnoted in late Roman sources, is that Delphi was shut down after a final prophecy deemed destabilizing. Not vague, not poetic, dangerous. The temple was sealed in the late 4th century, and the last recorded utterance attributed to the Pythia contains a phrase that refuses to soften with time. A year shall come when fire descends, and the gods withdraw their faces. You can dismiss it as metaphor. Many do. But the phrasing is wrong for metaphor. Greek fire imagery usually rises: sacrifice smoke, hearth flame, funeral pyres. This fire comes down, from above, from the realm of Helios, not Hestia. Ancient commentators noticed this anomaly. That's why the line survived at all, copied nervously into marginal notes, never recited aloud. What chills me is the context. The oracle was asked about continuity, whether Rome would endure. The answer was not political. It was elemental. Fire from the sky. Withdrawal. An ending not caused by armies, but by the heavens themselves. Imagine hearing that in a world where the sun was still a god, not a fusion reactor. Now bring yourself forward. You've seen the footage. Solar eruptions tearing loose like glowing wounds. Satellites glitching. Power grids trembling. Sound familiar? The ancients watched the sun with naked eyes and terror. We watch it with instruments and denial. Delphi doesn't give dates. It never did. But it gives categories of time, thresholds, years when rules break, when fire falls instead of rises. The Greeks believed such years marked the end of an age. Standing among those ruins, with heat radiating off the marble, I began to wonder whether we are approaching exactly that kind of year again. From Greece, the pattern moves west to a city that feared prophecy so much it tried to lock it away. Rome did not trust seers. It regulated them. That alone should tell you how seriously the Romans took the Sibylline tradition. The Sibylline books were not folklore. They were instruments of state, consulted only in moments of existential crisis, plagues, eclipses, civil collapse. Ordinary citizens never saw them. Senators did. And even then, only fragments were read aloud. Most of the books were destroyed. That is the official story. Fires, Christian purges, accidents of time. But destroyed is a slippery word in Roman history. Copies survived in quotations, commentaries, hostile rebuttals. And in those scattered remnants, a phrase appears more than once attributed to the Sibyl of Cumae. Annus Flammarum Signorum, the year of flaming signs. Not fire, signs in the sky. Roman augury was obsessed with patterns above, comets, halos around the sun, strange colors at dawn. Flaming signs were not city fires or volcanic eruptions. They were celestial anomalies. Red skies at noon, falling stars that didn't burn out, luminous arcs stretching across the night like banners. The Sibylline warning describes such signs clustering in a single year, followed by what the text calls mutatio saeculi, a change of the age. Here's what most people miss. Roman historians like Livy record years where these signs were seen, but never all at once. The Sibylline books describe convergence, a compression of omens. That's why the Senate feared it. A year like that meant the gods were no longer negotiating. Now pause and step into the present. You've heard scientists talk about once-in-a-century solar events. Aurora visible near the equator. Radiation storms forcing aircraft to reroute. Colors in the sky where colors shouldn't be. Individually, explainable. Together, uncomfortable. Rome believed the Sibyl spoke when cycles closed, when warnings were no longer optional. They didn't ask if the year of flaming signs would come, only how to survive it, which raises the question they never answered. What happens when the signs return, but the books are gone and no one is listening? From Rome's sealed vaults, the investigation turns east into a world where fire was not merely feared, it was measured. In ancient Persia, fire was truth made visible. To understand their warning, I had to sit with texts most people know only by name, the Avesta and later Pahlavi commentaries, copied and recopied by priests who believed the universe itself moved according to moral and cosmic law. Zoroastrian cosmology is precise. Time unfolds in vast cycles, and near the end of each cycle comes what the texts call the Great Burning. Not metaphorical hellfire, not punishment, a purification event overseen by Ahura Mazda, in which fire and molten metal flow across the world, burning away deception while sparing truth. The righteous pass through it unharmed. The false are undone. That's the theology. But buried in later commentaries is something stranger, a calendrical hint. Several Middle Persian texts describe a specific phase known as the Year of the Great Fire, a period when celestial heat intensifies before the final renovation of the world. The fire is said to come from the sky, weakening the boundary between the material and spiritual realms. Stars behave erratically. The sun strikes closer. These are not poetic flourishes. They are observational claims, written by a culture obsessed with astronomy and ritual precision. What unsettled me was the restraint of the language. No hysteria, no spectacle, just inevitability. Persian priests believed this year could be recognized not by panic, but by accumulation. Heat upon heat, sign upon sign, until denial becomes impossible. Now bring your attention back to today. Solar physicists speak of magnetic field reversals, of a weakening heliosphere, of charged particles pressing closer to Earth's skin. Different vocabulary, same phenomenon. One could argue coincidence, one could argue metaphor. But the Zoroastrian texts anticipate that objection. They warn that skeptics will always exist until the fire is felt, not debated. For the Persians, the year of the Great Fire was not the end. It was the crossing, the moment the world reveals what it has become, which leaves us with an uncomfortable mirror to hold up to ourselves. If such a year arrives, what exactly would it burn away? The fifth voice doesn't come from marble temples or imperial archives. It comes from damp stone cells and ink that smells faintly of iron and mold. To find it, I had to follow the trail into medieval Ireland, where Christian monks preserved something they officially condemned, fragments of Druidic memory. These remnants survive in places like the Book of Leinster, where pagan legend is quietly woven into genealogy and myth. Among these texts appears a phrase that translators long dismissed as symbolic, an bliain deag, the red year. Not a metaphor for war, not a harvest failure. A year when the sky itself is described as ruddy, when heat spoils wells, cattle refuse pasture, and the sun is said to linger too long. The Druids did not measure time with numbered years. They measured it by anomalies. And the red year was an anomaly severe enough to be remembered centuries later. What makes this chilling is the tone. There is no prophecy voice here, no divine announcement. The red year is described the way one would describe a famine or a storm, because to the Druids it had already happened once. It was a memory, not a prediction. The manuscripts describe people sleeping outdoors because homes trapped heat, rivers shrinking into warm, stagnant veins, and a strange redness in the dawn that lasted weeks. Irish scholars once argued this referred to volcanic dust. But there is no matching eruption. Others suggested metaphor. But metaphors don't include instructions, yet the text does. It advises against travel, warns of sickness from spoiled air, and speaks of fire without flame. That phrase stopped me cold. Fire without flame. Now sit with the present. You've heard modern phrases like wet bulb temperatures, heat domes, invisible radiation, heat that kills without burning, light that damages without flame. Sound familiar? The Druids believed the red year marked a thinning between worlds, between seasons, between what could be predicted and what could not. They believed it returned only when cycles aligned badly enough. And reading those lines, written by monks who didn't fully understand what they were preserving, I felt the same pressure I'd felt at Delphi. This wasn't myth trying to explain nature. It was memory warning the future. And it was written in red ink for a reason. The sixth source does not speak in visions or riddles. It speaks in numbers. To the Maya, prophecy was not inspiration, it was arithmetic. I spent months tracing this thread through surviving codices, especially the Dresden Codex, where priests recorded the sky with obsessive care, counting days the way others count heartbeats. The Maya tracked cycles within cycles, solar years nested inside ritual calendars, all wrapped in the long count. When one Baktun ended, another began. Most people know this system only because of the hysteria around 2012, which was never an apocalypse in Maya terms. What matters comes later, much later, buried in tables dealing with Venus, eclipses, and solar behavior is a warning attached not to an ending, but to a beginning, the 13th year of a new Baktun. In several interpretations of the Codex, that year is marked with a glyph associated with Kak, fire, not the hearth fire of life, but the celestial fire of the sun. Accompanying notes describe the sun biting the earth and seasons that arrive wounded. Again, scholars argue metaphor, but Maya metaphors are consistent. This one is not. It appears only at moments of astronomical stress, irregular solar movement, disrupted eclipse cycles. What makes this terrifying is the precision. The Maya didn't say someday. They said when the count reaches here. Depending on correlation constants used to align the Maya calendar with ours, the 13th year of the current Baktun falls uncomfortably close to 2026. Close enough that even small errors don't save us. Now imagine the scene. A priest standing on a limestone platform at dawn, eyes burning from years of sun watching, carving a warning meant for readers thousands of years away. He had no word for solar flare, no concept of magnetospheres, but he knew the sun could turn hostile. He had seen it before in the numbers. Today, scientists talk about solar maximums, about peaks that strain our technology and our bodies. Power grids, satellites, human circadian rhythms, different language, same anxiety. The Maya believed time itself carried intention. When certain counts aligned, events followed, not because the gods were angry, but because the cosmos moved like a machine, which leaves us staring at a date etched in stone and ink, asking a question we're not comfortable asking. What if the calendar wasn't wrong, just early? By the time we reach the seventh voice, the language sharpens. No riddles, no arithmetic, just imagery so physical you can almost taste the ash. The prophet Joel was not a court mystic or an astronomer priest. He was a witness to catastrophe, famine, drought, skies turned hostile. And in the midst of that collapse, he recorded words that have refused to stay buried in the book of Joel. I will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, the text says. Blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned to darkness. Most sermons stop there, spiritualize it, push it into an undefined end time. But Joel anchors his vision in sensation, heat, smoke, choking air, skies that no longer behave. This is not abstract judgment, it is environmental trauma. What's often overlooked is that Joel's prophecy unfolds in stages. First, agricultural collapse. Then, atmospheric signs. Only then, social unraveling. He describes people waking to skies the wrong color, daylight dimmed by something overhead, breathing air that feels burned. Pillars of smoke are not explosions. They are sustained, continuous, rising from cities, fields, forests. You know the image. You've seen it on screens. Now bring yourself forward. You've watched satellite footage of continents veiled in smoke. Wildfires so vast they generate their own weather. Skies over major cities turning orange at noon. Sunlight filtered into something alien. Joel's language stops sounding ancient very quickly. Here's the detail that unsettled me most. Joel does not frame these signs as punishment for a specific sin. He frames them as a warning before a turning point, a chance to recognize what time it is. He assumes people will be tempted to normalize it, to say, this has happened before. He insists it hasn't. Not like this. Not all at once. Joel believed such a convergence marked a narrowing of options, a moment when societies must choose awareness or denial, action or sleepwalking. The text never says the fire ends quickly. It implies endurance. And that's the pivot that should make you uneasy. Because the question is no longer whether Joel was right in some distant theological sense. The question is brutally practical. If the pillars of smoke are already rising and the sun already strains our eyes, how many signs do we need before we admit we are standing inside the warning? The eighth voice lowers its tone. No thunder, no accusation, just inevitability spoken with unsettling calm. In early Buddhist cosmology, the world does not end in a single cataclysm. It is purified in cycles, and before renewal comes heat, not symbolic suffering, physical fire. I found this thread while studying passages linked to the coming of Maitreya, preserved across multiple traditions and texts like the Kakavati Hanada Sutta. These texts describe a degenerate age marked by moral exhaustion and environmental imbalance. Then comes a year, or short span of years, defined by burning winds and fierce suns. Crops fail not from drought alone, but from heat that arrives out of season. Water remains, yet thirst increases. The air itself becomes tiring to breathe. This is crucial. The problem is not scarcity at first. It is excess. Too much heat. Too much exposure. Buddhist commentators were precise observers of suffering. They catalogued sensations. In these passages, people are said to avoid the open sky, to seek shade compulsively, to alter daily rhythms because daylight becomes hostile. Sound familiar? What struck me most is that the fire is never framed as divine wrath. It is framed as consequence, a natural correction after imbalance. The year of purifying flame is described as a threshold before Maitreya's appearance. Not the end of the world, but the end of a way of living. The texts emphasize recognition. Those who understand what is happening adapt. Those who cling to normality suffer most. There is no rescue, only adjustment. Now, look around you. Heat advisories that rewrite work hours. Cities redesigning themselves around shade. Human behavior quietly bending around a hotter sun. No panic, just adaptation, exactly as the texts describe. Buddhism teaches impermanence, but it also teaches timing. Certain changes cannot be rushed or delayed. They arrive when conditions mature. The year of purifying flame is not announced with trumpets. It is felt in the body, in fatigue, in breath, in the way sunlight becomes something you negotiate with, which leaves us with an uncomfortable alignment, a calm tradition, a measured warning, and a present moment that feels increasingly familiar to monks who wrote these words 2,000 years ago. If Maitreya comes after the fire, The question is not whether renewal is possible. The question is whether we recognize the purification while it's happening, or only after it's done. This is the point where denial usually steps in. I know the feeling. You line up 7 sources, 7 cultures, 7 warnings, and the mind searches for escape. Coincidence, metaphor, selective reading. I tried all of them. None survived contact with the pattern that emerged when I placed every account side by side on my desk, the pages overlapping like tectonic plates. Look at what they share. Not doctrine, not gods, not morality, structure. Every source describes a specific type of year, not a vague era, a compressed window, a convergence. Heat intensifies. The sky misbehaves. The sun becomes aggressive. Fire arrives without flame. Smoke without war. And most disturbingly, each tradition insists that this year is recognizable while it is happening, not only in hindsight. The Greeks spoke of fire descending. The Romans warned of flaming signs clustering together. The Persians described celestial heat thinning the boundary of the world. The Druids remembered a red year when water remained but thirst increased. The Maya marked a solar fire year deep inside a precise count. Joel wrote of sustained pillars of smoke that dimmed the sun. Buddhist texts spoke of burning winds and hostile daylight. Different vocabularies, same anatomy. Now bring in the modern layer, not prophecy, measurement. Solar physicists quietly note that the sun's current cycle is behaving irregularly. Peaks arriving faster, eruptions stronger, magnetic storms stacking instead of spacing out. Atmospheric scientists track heat domes that linger, smoke layers that refuse to disperse. Sunlight filtered through particulate haze for weeks. None of this violates physics. That's the problem. It fits too well. Here's the convergence moment most people miss. Ancient sources didn't predict disaster. They predicted stress, a test of systems, biological, social, technological. Fire as transformation, not annihilation. That aligns uncomfortably with a world whose infrastructure assumes a cooperative sky. You can dismiss one oracle, even 3, but 7 independent traditions converging on the same type of year, while modern instruments quietly register matching conditions, forces a different question. Not, do you believe this? But what would disbelief even protect you from? Because convergence doesn't announce itself with certainty. It announces itself with accumulation. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it, which leaves only one place left to look, not backward into manuscripts, but forward into data, into the one thing ancient priests never had. And that is where this story becomes immediate. I promised you we would end where ink meets instrument. This is that moment. No prophecy, no priest, just data streaming in silence from machines that do not believe in myths. Over the last decade, solar observers have begun using a phrase they rarely use in public briefings: unexpected acceleration. The sun's activity curve is steepening. Peaks are arriving early. Eruptions are clustering. The current cycle is not behaving like the neat models written 20 years ago. By late 2025 and into 2026, projections converge on a window of heightened risk, not apocalypse, stress, solar flares capable of overwhelming satellites, coronal mass ejections brushing past Earth's magnetic shield a little too closely. Enough to disrupt power grids, GPS timing, aviation routes, enough to matter, enough to feel. Heat on the ground compounds it. Longer summers, warmer nights, smoke that refuses to lift. fire without flame, smoke without war. I want you to notice something important. Ancient sources didn't say the world ends in the year of fire. They said the world changes. Systems built for one sky are tested by another. The vulnerable suffer first. The prepared adapt. The rest argue about definitions while the air grows heavier. Imagine yourself waking up during such a year. The light outside is sharp, almost metallic. You check the heat index before checking the news. Power flickers. The sky at sunset is the wrong color again. You tell yourself this is normal now. That's the most dangerous moment, because every oracle we've examined warned about normalization, about the temptation to call a threshold the new normal instead of what it is. Were the ancients predicting 2026 specifically? I can't prove that. No one can. But they were very clear about something else. When a year of fire arrives, recognition matters more than belief. Attention becomes survival. Adaptation becomes morality. So here is the only responsible ending to this investigation. Not fear. Awareness. Watch the sun. Watch the sky. Watch how often once-in-a-century events start happening every few years. Share what you notice. Prepare your systems, personal and collective, for stress, not fantasy. Because if 7 ancient voices were wrong, nothing is lost by paying attention. But if they were right, and the instruments are already whispering the same thing, then the real question is not whether 2026 is the year of fire. The real question is whether we'll recognize it while we're still inside the warning.